Hi, I'm James Zogby, and welcome to Viewpoint. Tonight we're going to discuss the conflict in Gaza and the newly formed Palestinian government. We're going to do that with Rob Malley of the International Crisis Group. Then we'll take a look at the refugee situation in the UN's latest report released just this week. And we're going to do that with Lavinia Limon. She's president of the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. But first, we're going to talk about Kosovo. After years of war and ethnic cleansing and NATO intervention, the situation in Kosovo finally stabilized in 1999. And for the last 8 years, Kosovo's remained a UN protectorate, though still technically a part of Serbia. In 2005, the Secretary General appointed the former president of Finland, Martti Ahtisaari, to head up an effort to negotiate final status arrangements for Kosovo. This March, the recommendations were submitted to the UN Security Council. The proposal calls for supervised independence for Kosovo. Now, that's an outcome supported by the US and the EU, but it's rejected by Serbia and Russia. Joining us to discuss Kosovo and plans for its future, its current situation, and what implications there are for Kosovo and the broader region is Daniel Fried. He's Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs. Ambassador Fried began his career in the Foreign Service 30 years ago. He served as Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for European and Eurasian Affairs at the National Security Council, and he's former ambassador to Poland. At the White House, he was actively involved in U.S. policy on NATO and Euro-Atlantic security. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Kosovo, which was a major topic in the headlines and a huge concern, not just in the Muslim world, but really throughout the Western world too, because of what we saw taking place in that country, is now back on the front burner again after a number of years. The Ahtisaari recommendations were just put in the form of a Security Council resolution, you just noted to me, and introduced yesterday. Now, before I start talking about who's for and against, and I want to talk about those, each of them in sequence, for our viewers, describe the recommendations, in particular this notion of supervised independence. What exactly does it mean?
We believe that the people of Kosovo, the majority ethnic Albanians, but also the Serbs in Kosovo, need clarity about their future. They need a future of peace, they need a future of reconciliation, and they need a chance to go to Europe, to join a united Europe. We support the Ahtisaari plan, this plan for supervised independence, because we think it's the best chance for all Kosovars to have a good future. Now, supervised independence means that Kosovo would be independent. It would have a government, it would have a constitution and elections. But for a period of some time, the international community would help Kosovo get on its feet and implement the Ahtisaari recommendations, which a lot of them have to do with minority rights protection. Now, the Kosovars, the majority Albanian government, has accepted all of this. They accept that the international community will help them. They've accepted supervised independence. They support United Nations actions. They support the continued presence of NATO forces for security, the EU to help with civilian administration, and a policing mission. So we think this is a plan that's workable. It has the support of their government, and we want to move ahead for the sake of all the people there.
Now, supervised specifically means protection for the Serb ethnic minority, about 10% of the population, and holy places that are of concern to Serbs beyond Kosovo. That is a big issue during the rebellion in Kosovo. It had to do with this historic role that some of these sites in Kosovo played for Serbs and the Serbian Orthodox Church universally. What are the kinds of protections offered here that make it a supervised independence?
Well, you're right.
Will there be physical protection for the sites?
Yes.
Okay.
NATO and again, the Kosovars have agreed to this. NATO would remain. There are about 15,000 NATO troops, 1,500 American. One of their duties is to protect the holy sites, the Serbian Orthodox monasteries. The other is to keep the peace in support of the local police that have been set up. and there'd be an international civilian office, a presence working with the Kosovo government.
What do the Serbs want that makes this plan unacceptable to them?
Well, it depends on which Serbs you talk to.
I read one specific paper by a Serb analyst who was saying that the area of Kosovo should be partitioned, with the Serbian portion reverting to Serbia, etc.
Well, the trouble is that there's no clean ethnic-based partition that's possible. It's true that a lot of Serbs live in the north, around the Mitrovica area, but over half, about 60% of the Kosovo Serbs live in the south, in scattered communities. There's no way to partition it. These people in the south would be very vulnerable.
Can Serbia block it?
No, not really.
Russia is opposed, and what troubles Russia most? Is it the independence of Kosovo, and therefore the relations that Russia has with the Slavic people in Serbia, or is it the notion of Kosovo and Serbia joining the EU? On a scale,
well,
what troubles Russia most? Both,
no,
or
I think that what troubles the Russians is the whole notion of the breakup of Yugoslavia, which they think is like the breakup of the Soviet Union. And I think they're very bothered by the parallels, and they just don't like the idea of Serbia, with which they identify, losing something of importance to it. And what we say to the Russians is, first, Serbia lost Kosovo when Milosevic went in and drove out hundreds of thousands of people. And secondly, the Serbs in Kosovo will be protected best through the Ahtisaari plan. And
the Russians are raising the issue of a Muslim state.
Some Russians raise an argument that we really don't have much respect for, which is that somehow Kosovo would be a center of Muslim-based terrorism in the middle of Europe. And let me explain why this is just not true. There are very few radical Islamists in Kosovo at all. This is a people that is pro-American, pro-European. They have a very tolerant view of the role of Islam. These are people that want to be Europeans. They want to join the EU. This is not some sort of terrorist hotbed. That's scary
I want to put a
talk.
map up, if we could, of the former Yugoslavia and the various republics involved. It's on the screen right now. What we're looking at, and I want to keep looking at that for a moment if we can, is the western part. Slovenia and Croatia and Bosnia-Herzegovina have some interest, especially Bosnia, but not as great an interest as Montenegro and Macedonia, and then Serbia itself. So looking at the eastern part of the former Yugoslavia, let's talk about each grouping, if we could. First, Macedonia, which has its own Albanian Muslim population, about almost a quarter of the population there. How will they be affected either by the independence or the lack thereof of Kosovo?
Good question.
Because the big issue here is the question of, does this create stability or instability?
That's a very good question. In fact, the Macedonians, both the Slavic majority